All right. Thanks for joining this panel. I'm going to moderate this panel session. We have a very interesting group of international experts on this panel. We're going to talk about collision of standards, technology, ethics. This is a very interesting topic. We wanted to sort of get a take from this esteemed panelists. We have Gilles Fayad, who's actually strategy development and advisor to IEEE on the AI ethics program. We also have Katie Evans join us as well. She is an AI ethicist at heart, and she also did write a comic strip with UNESCO around AI literacy, so we would be interested to hear her take as well. And then we also have Andreas Hauser, who's the CEO for digital service at TÜV Süd, who will share his perspective as well. So with that, let me kind of get into the discussion. So the first question is sort of pointed towards Gilles. IEEE is a pretty well-known standards developing organization. I mean, most of the audience probably are very familiar with Wi-Fi, which is IEEE 802 list of standards. So how did IEEE come into creating specifications around AI ethics? It sounds more social than technical. Usually IEEE is more involved in telecommunications and power and energy and those types of technologies. And how does it contribute to AI ethics adoption?
Sure. So IEEE back in 2016, I think, pioneered the work on what we called and has been coined since then, socio-technical standards, which are basically the social aspects that the technology impacts. And so how can you integrate the social implications of the technology that you are creating and integrating it within the technology development process itself. So it's really building standards for humanity. From that, a piece of work called the Ethically Aligned Design Framework was built that was referenced by the OECD, by UNESCO, UNICEF, IBM, etc., quite a few of these entities. And is a framework that allows you to go from principles all the way to documentation in terms of specifications, standards, and other tools that you can put effectively to work. So two major tools were IEEE 7000 for the design and development of software. When you develop your software, how can you integrate the ethicality, the values that need to be reflected in the solution in your design process? And IEEE certified, which is the purpose of this meeting, which is basically an assessment tool, a conformity assessment program to take any type of solution and have the ability to assess it from an ethical perspective. I never get calls. I don't know why I get calls now.
He's not that popular usually, but...
Okay. Did I answer your question?
No, that's very good. Thanks for sharing that. So the ethical impact of emerging AI technologies has received a lot of attention, right? And we see this daily on the news and things like that. And it has also been highlighted in the recent drafts of the EU AI Act as well. So this question is pointed towards Katie. So can you give us your thoughts and your insights why ethics is becoming an unavoidable part of AI design development and deployment, and some of the challenges that's associated with taking ethics seriously in the AI space?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ravi, for putting this together and having me here to speak to you all. So as he hinted, I am a philosopher and I write comic books. So my answers to these questions might be a little bit blue sky, but I would hope that my esteemed colleagues on this panel will drive into it in more detail. So I have two answers to this question. The first is very blue sky. The second is a little less blue sky. So first, the very blue sky answer. From a philosophical perspective, what's happening is we have increasingly autonomous and complex technologies that are being developed that benefit from less and less human oversight. On the other hand, we have contexts of deployment that are more and more laden with values, rights, and principles. What I mean by that is that an ODD, or an operational design context, if I were a human acting within it, I would have to be responsive to some rights, to some values in how I treat people or how I act in that context. So you put these two things together, very autonomous technology, very socially laden contexts. If you don't design technology to be respectful or at least responsive to these values, the technology will not find them on its own. And so what happens is these values and rights are undermined every time an AIS interacts with a user or an agent in that context. So that's my first very philosophical answer. The second answer, I think, is a bit more obvious for everyone. It's clear that over the past few years, AI has done maybe a lot of ethical damage, losses of privacy, losses of opportunity, bias, unfairness, threats to democracy and citizenship, meaningful information, journalism, I could go on, right? What we're seeing is the arrival of a new type of harm, which I would call an algorithmic type of harm, that is divorced from a traditional conception of what counts as safety design, right? We could usually think of physical welfare kind of being the be-all and the end-all of what matters. So as long as the user that's interacting with the system is physically fine, that's great. But what we're seeing now is that there's new harms that are coming, things like a threat to privacy, loss of opportunity. And so it's an expansion of the concept of safety itself that's happening, and ethics is a very big part of that.
So kind of a follow-on to that. So obviously this is an issue, and how can a program like Certified help to address some of the issues that you bring up? And how do we bridge the gap between these abstract ethical principles and concrete business practice that a lot of the tech companies employ?
Okay, so this is obviously the million-dollar question, right? Let's start by talking about what's obvious again. I think ethics as a concept makes a lot of technologists very uneasy, right? Maybe we think that there's something about ethics that matters, like, oh, we should care about ethics in the design and deployment of AI systems, but what does that actually mean? Who knows, right? And then when we get into it, it's all these open-ended questions, sort of dilemmas. Oh my God, we can never solve this problem. What are we going to do? What does it all mean, right? So this is sort of the status quo of what it's like to talk about ethics in concrete design or deployment scenarios, right? And so what that means is when you have global institutions coming out with AI ethics frameworks or principle documents, that's great because it answers the question of what matters ethically, perhaps, but it certainly doesn't answer the question of how. Right? It's very difficult to interpret a concept like dignity in the context of, let's say, an autonomous vehicle. How do we protect? Who knows, right? So this is where Certified, I think, really helps, because what it does from a methodological perspective is it paints an exhaustive picture of what ethics would look like in practice, what an organization that upholds an ethical profile by the lights of a principle that matters, like privacy or transparency, what that would look like. Now, in detail, what that means is it shows both the behaviors that would support this ethical profile, so a privacy-respecting organization, but also inhibit, so things that you could do and things that you probably shouldn't do, both at the same time. So it gives you a broad range of understanding of how to apply ethics in practice. On top of that, it touches different ways that ethics could matter in the design, deployment, development of an AI system. What I mean by that is you have an organizational component, one that looks at human resources, how they're managed, adequate records, all of the organizational governance side of this. But you also have technical specifications, right? What would ethics require in the design of algorithms or systems themselves? So it's important to look at both of them because sometimes they can be in conflict. And so Certified does this. And a good example of what would be a conflict would be a very privacy-respecting organization that doesn't look at any personal characteristics in its data collection, right? But then when it comes time to make decision-making, it could be difficult because it would lower the accuracy, right? So then you have something like the justified use of protected characteristics, for instance, to correct some kind of bias or to improve the fairness of a decisional output. So these are sort of all of the things that we cover. Finally, I think it's important to note that the certified process is very collaborative. So it involves stakeholders within the organization talking to ethical experts, understanding what ethics means in the context of their technology, understanding what their values are as an organization, and how best to emulate them in the ongoing assessment, right? So it's not just us saying, this is what matters. It's also a broader conversation about what ethics means in the context of a given AIS. Yeah.
Thanks. That's great. So I want to go to Andreas, but before that, maybe very quickly, Gilles, can you kind of share how IEEE certified the program is contributing to AI ethics adoption, in your opinion?
Sure. So, I mean, if we take what Katie basically described very eloquently, if we look at it from a practical perspective, as designers, as computer scientists, as engineers, we haven't really integrated ethics into the curriculum at university, right? We know how to build things, we know how to make them work according to functional requirements, but we don't have ethical functional requirements. What Certified does is that it brings these ethical functional requirements and allows you to integrate them in your design and also in the verification of your products. So it's a blueprint, it's a framework that allows you through a process and specific criteria, ethical criteria, to go through that and identify and integrate the ethical functional requirements, as well as what you need to produce to demonstrate that you have them there.
That's great, thank you. So kind of pointed towards Andreas. So you heard Katie and Gilles share some of the insights. So the question for you is around TÜV Süd. TÜV Süd is pretty well known as a purveyor of safe, people-centered, premium quality applications, right? In your view, what do businesses and organizations that TÜV deals with gain by including ethical considerations in their AI quality readiness?
Also, thanks for having me here. 2 points, as you also had 2 fun principal points, but they're not very philosophical, actually. So one thing is ethical AI establishes a certain level of trust, right? And trust is key for consumers, adopters, deployers using AI, and the other part is the risk. Let me just briefly elaborate a bit. If you have a product and you know that it's transparent, you know what the intention is of the AI system, right? You even know that you are talking to an AI system, because sometimes that's also not clear. You are clear what happens with your data, for instance, when you enter something, right? This establishes the trust, and a lot of these trust elements basically are ethical related, right? You want to protect your privacy, you want to see that your values are also recognized and considered. And in business terms, that means if I bring up a product into the market and I can establish that trust, higher chance that it's being bought compared to other products where you simply don't know what happens, basically, right? And the other part is risk. If you have if you took ethical considerations into the design and the development, you can, at least to a certain degree, make sure that your risk, for instance, of compromising your reputation because your algorithm was kind of discriminating someone is at least to a certain degree mitigated. We never can remove this completely, but it's mitigated. So reputational risk, which can lead into legal risks. There was a case, I mean, there are many cases, you mentioned a few. There was a lawyer case, which is very famous, basically, who used then ChatGPT for precedences which didn't exist, for instance, right? That's not only from a moral, ethical perspective, you don't do this as a lawyer, right? Just take random outputs as reality or as the truth, but also it has severe legal consequences. So the risk, I think, is another key element in this equation, and the ethical part is very substantial, actually.
So just as a follow-on to that, AI assessments, and obviously TÜV does provide some of these types of services, but often it is dismissed as wishful thinking. There's a lack of enforcement or requirements or hard law, or this is an added cost for a manufacturer who's deploying, products that to be consumed by the general public. What do you think of this view, and what consideration, if any, does it overlook?
Yeah, also visual thinking, I would say the time is over for calling that visual thinking. We generally say the Wild West for AI is over, right? We cannot now throw out this technology without any clear guidelines and requirements you have to meet, and ethical is simply a very strong element of it, what I mentioned before. The fact that organizations come to us and ask for us, actually, how can I demonstrate the responsible use of AI? I think that already confirms that there is a need. I also have to say the awareness, I think, is still not there where we want to have it in the market, right? There's still a big gap. Even if you talk to organizations who are seriously now, let's say, trying to scale AI in their organizations, when you talk about ethics, it's still kind of considered a bit more fluffy, not clear. And that's where also the certified program and these specific standards come into the picture, because they substantiate this from a fluffy general term into a very specific set of requirements. And ultimately, I mean, many talk about the AI Act, which will have a big impact. And when you look into the requirements, 70% definitely are ethical related, or at least a significant number of criteria you have to meet, and they are ethical related. Once you mentioned also just in a comment on the costs, right? This we hear very often. It costs us additional money to make sure my product is ethically compliant, right, or compliant with certain ethical requirements. I mean, let's be clear. Of course, it costs something. It's the same when you say, okay, I have to spend some money into the safety of a car. I think nobody's questioning this anymore. But this technology is new, so we're all fiddling around what that exactly means. But we all want to have a system that meets our understanding of values, right? And this is basically another, let's say, strong reason why actually organizations really have to look into this. And but we are right now in a very exciting time where regulation is not 100% clear. Although we have to face it, China has already implemented certain regulations already. They are ethical related. You have to support government, for instance, right? In the US, we have also already enforced basically regulations, but the big impact we will see definitely with the AI Act. But it's, I think, now the time really to create that awareness and understand that ethical is not just a fluffy word. Yeah.
Great. So I think we can kind of summarize this as, there is a general need for ethical constraints, some guidance, some kind of assessment program, and it should be a guiding force to navigate through the AI, the complex regulatory landscape, as well as having ethical systems coming out with products. So I want to kind of deep dive a little bit. So Gilles, maybe you can share with us what is certified, and how do you build such a program? And I believe it's a conformity assessment program. So maybe you can share what does it take to build such a conformity assessment program, and how do you see it sort of shaping the AI ecosystem in practice?
So the conformity assessment program is something that is basically built by stakeholders, experts in the field. It's not something that we decide one day to wake up and do by ourselves. And it follows very rigorous processes for which IEEE is quite known. Now, what it does is that it enables an ecosystem of participants to offer a service. And that service is an assessment and certification service. And the way it works is basically a customer, somebody who has developed or is operating, to use the terminology that is very much aligned with the EU AI Act, an AI software product or hardware product would basically want to assess the ethicality of their solution. So ethicality, as you know, is part of what you have in the EU AI Act, but it's also very much present in most of the regulatories that you have worldwide and that you will need to address in order to access these markets. So the way they do it is that they team up with an assessor, and that assessor will walk them through the process, first by going through an ethics profiling of their solution, which is you look at their product, which we call the concept of operations. You look at the values that surround this product, and you map at the end these values to specific ethical criteria. At that point, what you have identified, because certified is a risk-based framework, you have identified an impact level, high, mid, or low. And you have identified the specific criteria you want to focus on. And based on that, you will go then into the assessment phase. And this is where the assessor will help the developer or the operator of a solution to build what is called the case for ethics, which is a document that encompasses all of the ethical functional requirements, together with many different things, but the ethical functional requirements and the type of evidence that is needed. And then you can go with that document and document that evidence to demonstrate the ethicality of your solution. To the point that Andreas was making, that allows you to first show that you care about ethics. Second, that you have done your best effort with respect to ethics. And in preparation for regulation, it also puts you on the right track to make sure that you don't have to re-engineer your products at the end. All of this is being done pretty much in the confidentiality of your environment as a developer or as an operator. You get the results, you know what works, you know what needs improvement, and at that point you can decide whether or not, if you are good, the assessor will help you and tell you basically now you're good enough to go for certification. You can then decide to go for certification. That is a separate entity that will basically independently verify the document that you have just created, the case for ethics. And on that basis, all of that, to answer the second part of your question very quickly, if I have a few seconds, you need to have an ecosystem. You need to build, essentially train these assessors. You need to authorize these people who are experts now in the certified process, in the ethical aspects of the design and development and verification of a product. And so these individuals are trained, and then they become authorized. The partners can then take from that pool of assessors and basically build a team if they don't have their own team, and offer a service, an assessment service that then the industry can use. So you have to build an ecosystem around it. What is interesting at the same time is that it builds kind of a new profile, a new specialization that comes on top of your specialization, whether you're in auditing or in AI or in training aspects, whatever it is. You could become a training provider, you could become an assessment provider, and it basically builds the ecosystem around it.
Okay, great. So, Andreas, so again, this program is a very collaborative program. So, IEEE has, as Gilles shared, has developed criteria, has developed a program, and sort of manages and runs this program. But important aspect of this is collaborative, and companies like TÜV Süd are sort of an integral part of that program, expanding at scale. So, Andreas, what made you pick certified? Why certified? How are you sort of integrating this into the offering that you're providing your clientele?
So it's the other $1 million question, right? Okay, quickly. Our approach is agnostic. Also that means we certify and test and inspect and assess according to best practices, standards, or industry best practices. And we cover that, we classify this in safety, security, legal ethics, performance, and sustainability, basically, these 6 buckets or pillars. And again, we look mainly on standards. So for the ethical part, we were also looking for the right frameworks and approaches. And well, some years back, basically, we were actually part of the standardization for the IEEE 7000 standard series, which is best practice because there's consensus in the community and the experts that this is the right approach, right? These requirements are waterproof. So we chose this because it's, first of all, again, based on standards. And secondly, it's properly operationalized. That means what you explained, Jill, basically, there is a proper way of training, of certifying assessors so that you use that framework and do an assessment. The outcome is the same, whoever is doing the assessment. So the one is the standards, the other one is basically the operationalization of this in a nutshell. Running out of time, I guess.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to Katie with a question. So when we started this work at IEEE, in 2016, we had a speaker come in, and one of the questions during the talk was, one of the audience member actually asked, does my kid need to get a driver's license years from now? The topic was around AI and autonomous driving. So I have that concern as well. I'll have a kid who will start learning how to drive in a couple of years. So I know, Katie, you did some contextualization exercise around autonomous driving and ethics. Should I be worried as a parent? I mean, what did you learn from that process?
Thank you very much, Ravi. How to put this? I think, your daughter can look forward to a safer driving experience because we'll have vehicles that will make sure that whether she's driving or it's driving, it will crash less. However, there might be a hidden cost to this safer driving experience, notably, for instance, the incredible potential for violations of privacy that's currently occurring when we don't adequately consider the trade-off between safety and privacy in, for instance, surveilling the passenger to make sure that they're available, that they're aware, that they're alert, understanding all of that stuff. There was a good Mozilla Foundation report that came out last month that said that there's so many data points that were potentially, capturable on passengers in CAVs, that you could even infer things as random and scary as sexual activity. So yeah, I think you don't have to worry about what you usually have to worry about when it comes to your daughter driving a car, but you might still have to worry.
Tracker.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah, yes. And to that point, I think we have a tendency to think often, in the case of the ethics of mobility, about dilemma trolley type scenarios, the baby or the grandma, the priest or the criminal. This has distracted from what I think is really important ethical considerations that deserve to be adequately treated in the future of mobility, not just privacy, but things like transparency and accountability for the limits of the system, things like accessibility with over-the-air updates. Are we able to access critical safety updates if we live in a rural community? Probably not. And certainly biases in classification, right? So because I am a certain way, the vehicle cannot recognize me as it should or equally, and because of that, I'm disadvantaged in its decision-making or disregarded altogether. So there's a lot to unpack there. Happy to talk about it with anyone who's interested.
Okay, so we have about a minute left, and this was a topic that came about pretty much on the main stage by every speaker that I listened to. Generative AI. Is Certified able to tackle generative AI, or does it address generative AI?
I'll take a stab at it first. So essentially, Certified is a tool, right? If you talk about generative AI in general, let's be more specific. If you talk about the ChatGPT use case where you have an uncontrolled data set, access to everyone, no real guardrails on it, etc., then obviously you have issues there. And it's hard to build a concept of operation, to identify use cases, scope, etc. around it. But if you are using generative AI in the context of modeling or generating text representation or even image representation or whatever of a specific topic for which you control the data set, you control everything, it's just another use case. From that perspective, yes, generative AI can be tackled by Certified. The open-ended use case of an oracle answering anything and everything without any guardrails or not knowing where the data comes from, no, Certified cannot cover that.
Thanks. Did you want to add something to that, Andreas?
Yeah, I agree. The point is, I think we have to always focus on the use case. If you have the clear application, and I mentioned the lawyer case, use ChatGPT, right? I mean, ChatGPT, it's a black box to a certain degree, of course. But if you look into the application, you can clearly identify the risks. You can derive from the applications the risks this lawyer has taken, just as an example. So in principle, when you look into the application, you can go very systematically through all the quality pillars I mentioned. And when it comes to ethical, definitely you can apply this. It's always a use case.
I'd like to add just one point to what Andreas said, because he made me remember something. Certified is not going to fix it for you. It's not going to solve it for you, but it's going to identify the areas that are sensitive that you need to look into. So, for example, explainability is one of them. The ability to understand that you're talking, knowledge that you're talking to a machine and not to a user, which could have avoided many tragic use cases. So these kind of things are things that will be identified through certified. It will not solve them. It will not give you the solution for it, but it will hint as the type of evidence that you can build or demonstrate to show that you are covering it.
Yeah. Great. I'm sure we would all like to hang out and chat more, but I guess our time is up. So I want to thank all of you for hanging out and listening in. And feel free to visit the booth, D36, to chat more. And I guess we will hang around for a bit if there's more questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.